Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Lights on Data show. Today, we're going to tackle and talk about Gen AI, Generative BI.
Actually, yes,
Yes.
very nice. Our wonderful guest today is Avi Perez. Avi is the CTO and the co founder of Pyramid Analytics. In addition to driving the company's long term technology roadmap, he oversees the corporate strategy and all aspects of the company's R&D efforts. Welcome, Avi. It's very exciting to have you here.
Thank you very much, both of you, George and Diana. Nice to be on your show today.
Thanks for being on and talking about Gen BI. And the reason why I said Gen AI initially is because I feel that's what everybody is thinking of
Exactly.
when they hear generative. The next word would be AI. So, Generative BI, I know in talking to my colleagues and friends, they were like, oh, tell us more. What's it on? I said, okay, listen to this podcast today. What is it? And really, how does it differ from the traditional approaches to business intelligence?
So, if I back up a second and I'll give you the definition of what we think Gen BI is, the idea of bringing AI into analytics has been around for a long time, maybe more so than many other enterprise or tool-based software that you can think of. I'm talking maybe 5, even 10 years ago, people were already doing this because it's really obvious to glue the power of machine learning, which is at the end of the day data driven, with the data itself. It's a very obvious thing to do. But I think with the advent and basically the next era of generative AI and large language models hitting the world as we know it today, it's very obvious now that it's going to take on a whole new leap. So generative AI is, we all know what that is. And our take on it through the idea of generative BI is to bring the power of AI in general, the frameworks, the technologies, yes, the large language models as well, but I must emphasize not only large language models, and connected very deeply into analytics, classic business intelligence, and ultimately the eureka point is what we think of as decision intelligence, which is not so much drawing me the pie chart, even though that's what I think at the moment we're mostly focused on doing, because even that's a difficult job, but actually driving the answer. Like, what should I do tomorrow is actually what
Mm-hmm.
everyone wants to do. I always tell people, if I could tell you the answer, you'd never look at another pie chart. Like, I don't care what the data looks like, just tell me what I need to do. So from that perspective, generative BI is a very catchy concept where we're taking generative AI and embedding it deeply into the world of analytics, machine learning, and ultimately decision intelligence.
It's beautiful. And may I ask, can we also take a look and see
Yes.
what it would be like?
Hooray. This is what I get excited about. So I'm going to give you a quick example of it. I'm going to
Yeah.
show you just a really simple example of what it does. And actually it's a very good sort of microcosm of all the magic, including the power of large language models and generative AI, as we all know. I'm going to click this button over here, which starts what we call Discover. Discover is basically building a visualization or a new standalone report. Pick a data model, which is sitting on a SQL database. And I'm throwing here into what we call Pyramid Pro, Discover Pro, which is quite an advanced piece of software. And I'm going to ask you to ignore all the buttons here and just imagine they don't exist. And we're just going to go ahead and focus on just the question. So here we go. I'm going to ask it a question. All right, build me a visualization. I want to see sales by the states in the United States that are just in the Northeast. I hope I got the question correct, that it understands what I mean. You never know. Okay, in some respects, it's not a bad problem that it didn't actually do what I want. That in some ways is showing you some of the cleverness that if it can't work it out, it's going to ask me again. So let me see if I can pick it up again. If it doesn't work, I'll type it in. Here we go.
Yes.
Here you go. I just typed it in.
Yeah.
That kind of sucks everybody on the call. Sorry about that. Let's see if this one works better now. There you go.
Wonderful.
Got something there. So
Wow.
this is interesting because it understood from the question what the Northeast was, understood the question states. It brought me two metrics, which is why it's given to me as a bubble plot. So you get one measure that drives, for example, the color, the other one driving quantity or size, should I say. And from this perspective, it's clever. The reason I wanted to show this to you with all that issue in the middle there is nobody knows what the Northeast means, right?
Mm,
Northeast is not built into the database. And it's a very small example, but it's a really clever one because the Northeast is something that is understood in the general population. It's something that is posted on the internet. So somewhere somebody understood what that means. And that's really smart because in the end, that's effectively what it do. In fact, if I do it as a shape map over here, we'd recognize the states even clearer.
Wow.
Wow.
This is a great definition of bringing the power of the large language model in that. Unfortunately, something with the sound, the microphone is not picking up my sentence. I think that the microphone doesn't work well here. But outside of that, typed in or spoken to, it should have been actually able to produce that. And this is a good example of what we mean by that. Obviously, from here, if I said, and I won't speak it again, I'll just change to a grid and shame because the speech to text is called add expenses and let's say returns information with totals. It should be able to now follow up with the next question. And this is, by the way, the fundamental piece in the story. The idea that you can continue a conversation with the engine and not really run these things as
Wow. And it's done.
standalone activities. So it understood from the previous step what I meant there. It understood that I was looking at sales and quantity before. Now it flipped it to a grid, add expenses, and so on and so forth. And I can go on and on for hours. And so it's contextual, and it doesn't require us to compile software on each particular iterative round. Sorry for the flub beginning there, but at least you get
No,
some
no
idea.
worries.
No,
To
this is
quote Susan Walsh
magic.
here, this is so cool. And it is definitely next level there. Wow.
Yes, all right.
And regardless if you speak to it or not, or if you just type in, it's as incredible. Whereas before, you would definitely need to have a little bit more knowledge on how to pull those different tables and how to make the joins, what visualization to choose.
I can do it too now.
Well, what's interesting is, and this is what I was saying, to us, generative BI is more than simply the Gen AI framework and the large language model. So one of the things that I think people have a misunderstanding about is the LLMs are lousy at math, which is a shocking statement to say aloud, and by extension, lousy at analytics. You can use some of it, and there have been lots of attempts to get it to it, but as it stands right now in this moment in time, it's not particularly good at doing it. Actually, the whole game has to change considerably. The way to think of it is what I call baking the cake problem. We need to come to the LLM with a description of the ingredients we have in the pantry.
Yeah.
Then ask it a question, bake me a chocolate cake. It should bake the best, or give me a recipe for the best chocolate cake it can make with my ingredients. But it doesn't bake the cake. It has to hand it to me. I'm going to call myself the robot. And I'm going to go run around in the kitchen now, blend all the ingredients, do this, do that, put it in the oven, and then ultimately serve it. The LLM is good for the recipe bit, but has no idea what the ingredient list is and has no idea how to actually make the cake because it doesn't make the cake. And that's exactly what Pyramid does. Now you're seeing other people doing the robot thing with other things, like people are generating Python, for example, to do the robot function, which is on its own profound because the Python is coming straight out of the LLM. But functionally, it doesn't work because every question is a standalone application that really is slow, it's clunky, and everything is completely disparate from one thing to the next. You wouldn't really want to work like that if you didn't have to. But things might change and things will change. It's a very fast-moving place. And that's the differentiation in concept between the way we've done it and maybe the way you might have seen it work elsewhere.
Yeah, it's next level. And I love the analogy with the cake. So just to sum it up, the LLM has that recipe, and then Pyramid is the robot and takes the recipe and can actually run with it. And you don't have that human interaction to do the things, just to provide the, hey,
End
give me,
result.
based on that recipe, I want you to do that.
Correct. And what I think is interesting is the LLM also can't see your data. Customers don't want to share their data with the LLM. That's another glitch. So people often ask, well, does it mean the LLM can see my data? What kind of issues they're going to create? And the answer is no. Like I said, we show the list of ingredients that it can be made. We don't actually hand it the ingredients. Big difference between those two statements. And because of that, if you bring it to the real world, your data doesn't actually go to the LLM. We just describe what your data contains in a very, I wouldn't say bland way because that would be useless, but in a way that doesn't actually expose your very sensitive information to any LLM.
Yeah.
And then it works. There is next era is going to involve that the LLM has much, much say, a much stronger ability to see the ingredients themselves, like actual specific ingredients, and therefore write more intelligent recipes, right? That's really what we're trying to do. And that's where you get to the private LLM world, the fine-tuned LLMs and all the rest of that. But that, I must say, feels a little bit distant from where we stand today. There's lots of barriers to making that work effectively on really big corporate data. So a little database of 10 rows, yeah, anybody can do that. How about a billion rows? What are you going to do with a billion? What about 10 billion? We've just built ourselves a data lake in some gigantic technology like Snowflake or Redshift or Databricks, and no, we're not going to export it into the LLM to ask the next question around sales in New York. It doesn't work.
And Avi, would you be able to then augment the LLM's background, so to provide it with very specific information on the company? So to say, this is what customer means for this company. This is, yeah.
So this is a great question, which is, there are lots of ways of saying it. One way is to talk about fine tuning. And if you look at what a fine-tuned LLM means, it's not practical for most companies today. I believe it will be solved, and maybe very soon, by the way. I think everyone's working on that. But fine-tuning an LLM in the true sense is a little distant from most companies. In fact, it's miles away from most companies. It's a very technical process, and it requires an exceptional degree of expertise. So to answer your question is, can I, in the pyramid example, can I, as a user, influence its understanding of my data, my business, and my questions? And the answer is yes. You can actually build that into the model, and it gets fed in the background. You can't see it, and it takes into account. Obviously, what's brilliant is if I ask for, show me anything to do with customer demographics, and has no idea what that is, the LLM, with its general knowledge of what's typically demographical data, will impute it. That's the genius of an LLM, and it's unbelievable in that regard. But if I have some crazy esoteric term that no one in the world will ever use except me and my company, there is a way to influence those specific things. And of course, that's the challenge. How much of an educational process do I have to go through to get this LLM intelligent about my world? And getting that balanced out is exactly where the stress points are in the whole process. But it's there. It's a question of how much you want to do as a customer, a company, or as a user, so to speak. And that's our general challenge, how to make that easy.
Yeah. So this is truly a groundbreaking, and I'm curious, what inspired you in Pyramid Analytics to delve into generative BI?
Like I said, we've been doing it for years. It's not new to us. The idea of having natural language querying has been in the product in its current format for at least 5-6 years.
Wow.
And we predate that going back further. Even to this day, we actually have something called a portable language model built into the application, which can handle very simple, straightforward questions that don't need to run through a large language model. It's cheaper, it's quicker, and most importantly, it runs off the grid. You don't have to be connected to any large language hosted solution, which today is the only real way to run an LLM. A privately hosted LLM, while they're becoming more popular, is still way off for most customers in the world. It's just, it'll cost you millions to match the power of a publicly hosted OpenAI, Azure AI, and whatnot. But we have a little engine called the PLM, Portable Language Model, which we've been using for years. It's very effective, but it's nowhere as clever as a large language model, which is why we have the yin and yang. And we actually let you choose, by the way. You can pick as a customer by data set which model you want to use on which data set, because in the end, we expect the LLMs to be vertically centered. The accounting data should run with the accounting LLM, and the marketing data should run with the marketing LLM, right? It makes sense. By the way, if it's more focused, it'll be smarter and also be probably lighter, which means it's cheaper to run. That's another issue that everyone needs to realize. And the PLM is just another version of that. If you can ask very specific questions that are narrow and not so crazy, the PLM will do a very good job, even though it's not as clever as an LM.
And no follow-up questions, right?
Yeah. The PLM can handle a follow-up. It's just not as broadly intelligent. If I ask the PLM, show me the northeastern states in the United States, it has no idea what the northeastern states are. It's just not trained for that broad, I hate to use the word knowledge, but it doesn't understand what that means because it wasn't trained for it. If I said something very specific, add the sales and cost data to this visualization, it will understand it because it's very specific and on point. If I said add revenue, it would probably fail because the model was built specifically with the word sales, and it doesn't know that. Whereas an LLM would know revenue, it might understand my earnings, any number of synonyms for the word sales, or any
Hmm.
weird way I might ask it as a user. And in the end, natural language needs to be natural. Like if you have to be trained on how to ask a question, it's not really natural in the end at all. And that's exactly what we're trying to solve for.
Got it.
So that's the general idea. You keep it very fluid. And what's great is you can pick and choose. The current iteration that's in production at the moment, it actually cascades. If the question is very simple and we get 100% strike rate, we'll go the PLM. If it doesn't work, we'll go the LLM. And cheaper, faster, quicker. Think of it like that. And this is very good, very smart. It's hard to see it if you don't know what you're looking for, but we've built it exactly like that.
So regardless of choosing the PLM or the LLM, from a practical standpoint, how can organizations really effectively integrate Gen BI into their existing analytics workflow and strategies?
Unfortunately, our little demo, which was a little bit bumpy there in the beginning, the first thing that you really want to do, and in my opinion, the entire generative BI is to make analytics and data-driven decision making as easy and as accessible as possible to the least technical user possible. So if I can ask a question simply with just plain text, I would love to say in speech. If you see our videos, you'll see the speech working, by the way. But for today's session, I had to type it, which kind of sucks. But that's beginning to break down the barrier of complexity, all right? So the first way to implement it is to just make it there, accessible, functional, to let people use it. However, what you just saw can be run fully embedded in another application, your hosted application, fully functional. And if you get all the bits and bobs working correctly, even with the talking part, and then we take it and we put it contextually where the user is operating. So if, for example, you live in every day inside your ERP solution, then yeah, I never want to leave that and go and jump into the BI product just
Yeah.
to ask my next data question. I should ask it here. And that's what we think is part of that. That too is available from Pyramid today. We'll see the same things appearing on mobile phones, obviously on any mobile devices. Today you can do some of it. The question is how powerful is it? And I'm speaking for Pyramid at the moment. You can type in Pyramid, you can't talk because of the complexities of getting the speech from your phone through the pipe all the way to the large language model to understand what you mean and back again, right? We're not running through Siri on your phone or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit more complicated than that. But it's getting there. We're talking, a few months away from getting those barriers down. And I think it's just going to be contextualized. That's the general answer to your question. It'll be where you need it to be rather than where someone else wants it to be. And I think that will make it easy, accessible. And that's it. And remember, the real eureka point is not build me a pie chart. It's, could you tell me what I should do tomorrow morning to increase my business by 300%?
Right.
I want you to tell me the answer. Tell me the decision. Don't tell me the data. Tell me the decision. That's eureka. That's actually the North Star, I would argue, for everybody.
Avi, I'm really curious, if you were to ask it the same question, but multiple times, would it maybe portray the answer in different formats?
With the way we've implemented it, let me put it this way. The recipe could come out differently,
Mm-hmm.
right? And because of that, then the rest of the cascade would potentially change. If the recipe is roughly the same, then you will get a very consistent response because a lot of the load, the query, the visualization, the interactivity, the understanding of what to do, in other words, the implementation of the recipe is done by the same robot each time, which is Pyramid in our case. So I think it would be less variability than you would believe. But if you go online to our site, for example, you see an example of me asking a question, build me a sales dashboard with 6 charts in it, 3 KPIs, and a year slice or a year filter. I don't tell it which charts to build. I don't tell it which metrics to do, so on and so forth. And in that regard, it will be a little bit more random because it's randomly going through the structure of my data and working out what, generally speaking, is most interesting to do.
Mm-hmm.
So a very open-ended, fluid question would be more random. A more specific question, far less random, and it's quite consistent. And that's in spite of the fact that we have the issue of hallucinations. I don't know if anyone's heard of that problem, but the Gen AI and the large language models have these things, hallucinations, where they make things up. If I don't know the answer, I'll just make up a story and lie to you. right? It's almost human in that regard. And that's a problem that we need to deal with. By the way, it's one of the reasons why we don't like using it to generate statistics and facts. They're very hard to prove that they're right. And we have no idea where they got them from or if they're relevant. A classic one, you can do it in pyramid. Show me my sales per capita and by country. You need to know population stats. Okay, from which year, from what date, from which source. They look roughly correct. They're clearly sourced from somewhere. But if you're looking at very specific values, you could be off by quite a lot. And that's still where I think the LLM universe hasn't resolved that issue of accuracy in its numbers. Whereas if you said get the sales numbers and pyramid is enacting that, the robot is doing it, it's for the query you ask, it's 100% accurate because we're asking your data with a bona fide query engine, what is the result, and it is what it is, assuming the context of the question makes sense relative to what you asked for.
And the beauty of it as well, through the help of the other tools that you're offering through Pyramid Analytics, is you can hook it up to many other databases and systems as well within the organization. So you can have an overview of everything.
You hit on a very big point. I would argue in our specific space, in our ecosystem, I argue this is the most important thing to achieve with generative AI in general, and what we think is a pillar of generative BI. There's no point in coming to the table with this very cool stuff if the first thing I need to do as a customer is move my data to a new location, new data tech stack, restructure it, remorph it, and spend the next 6 months making it work with whatever AI tech I have downstream. This is basically the kiss of death, game over, because no one's interested in that. So we fundamentally believe that it must be the other way around. I can take the Gen AI tech, frankly, all the AI tech, pointed at any database, and it should just work out of the box. Obviously, that's an extremely tall order and something very aggressive to say. So it can't literally be any database, but if, for example, pyramid-specific use case, any ANSI SQL compliant database technology, doesn't have to be structured, by the way, but generally it will work out of the box pointedly. You literally don't lift the finger, it just goes. If your data is lousy, structured poorly, or the data tech is slow, then you'll feel that in the responses and what it does. But the belief is that if you're asking a real question on real data, it'll come back in a real way, and then you'll be satisfied with the answer.
Beautiful.
We have a great question here from Yassi. He asks, natural language querying supports all languages?
It does. Amazing. So the PLM, portable language model that we offer, which is tiny, by the way, relative to these things, only works in English, just to put it out there. So unfortunately, that's not going to work. But if you ask a question in any language, the large language models that exist out there, the good ones, support all the languages. So we're seeing people asking questions in French, Spanish, the right to left languages, Hebrew and Arabic work perfectly. What's even more impressive, this is going to be a shocker, it responds in those languages too. I just saw the chatbot talking back to me, but that was only in English. But it can talk back to you in your own language. And then the most important part that I would argue, let's assume I open up an English data set and ask for the question in French. It's smart enough to take the French, understand what you mean in French, but map it to the English ingredients and give me back a recipe that I will understand. So we're seeing all of that work just fine. And it doesn't hurt, of course. A pyramid also supports the data in multiple languages, even the same data set but different languages. So there can be even that variation. One last comment on the languages, since you asked the question, I'm going to give it to you the whole way. Pyramid also writes queries in MDX, which is a vestige of a yesteryear for analytics, but it's still prevalent out there in the Microsoft space, SAP, Oracle. So we not only can write questions on top of SQL data sources, also on MDX data sources, and it gets even more crazy because that's something you don't see very often. And yet there's so many of those data sources in the wild, and people are dying to tap into them. And you believe it or not, be asking SAP BW a question in French, even if the metadata is in English, it'll work just fine. Assuming it knows how to understand the crazy nomenclature of SAP, which is a special example on its own.
Avi, it feels to me like you've already achieved the future
Yeah,
or
the
what the
future
future
is
can
now.
hold. As the CTO and co-founder of Pyramid Analytics, what really excites you the most about other possibilities of Gen BI?
So I gave a hint at it earlier, which is the answer to the what should I do question, right?
Yeah.
The four stages of analytics maturity, like what happened, descriptive analytics, the diagnostic, why did it happen, the predictive, what could happen, and then the prescriptive is what should happen. And if you think about it, as humans, we just want to know what we should do.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, couldn't care less about anything else. We live in the historical and we live in the predictive space because that's functional today. But the should business is really tough to achieve. Okay, I run a retail operation. What should I do tomorrow? A simple question like that, unbelievably, mesmerizingly complicated to answer, as you can well imagine. Our goal, believe it or not, is to target that particular outcome. Even though this is not part of generative BI, the specific tech behind Pyramid is all the building blocks to get there. For example, in the last year, we've put a whole new framework for new what we call optimization, linear, nonlinear programming, very technical stuff here, which are the key elements to begin to answer the what should question. So our goal in the next 12 months is to take the questions around build me a chart around sales by state or show me my most profitable manufacturers or where my customers buying whatever product. That's all cool, interesting in itself, a revolution from where we are today. But the real quantum leap is going to be able to say, listen, look at my data,
Mm-hmm.
and could you please tell me tomorrow what I should do to become more profitable? Should I be buying more stock in IBM or should I be buying it in Microsoft? And I don't mean asking ChatGPT for some guess based on my data, real facts. What should I be doing? So being able to hook up all of those engines, which again the robot has to do, with the smarts of the recipe generated from the LLM would be profound. I don't think it'll happen in a year, but I honestly believe that's where we're going. We want to be able to be Captain Kirk, the USS Enterprise, and you just say, fly me to beta 142. I don't care how you get there. I don't care which direction it is. I don't even know where it is. I'm going to have a cup of coffee. Call me when it's done. That's basically what I want to do. So, okay, run my business tomorrow. What should I be doing? And that's it. Because I'm taking the rest of the day off and I'm going to go and sit on the beach. It sounds
Nice.
crazy, but that's what we're all gunning for, something miraculous like that. It could be doable
Miraculous
at some
indeed.
point in time.
Mm, mm, I wanted to ask you, Avi, so from an organization's perspective, what should their journey be with Pyramid?
You mean in terms of how it would be implemented, something like that?
Yes, exactly.
So look, Pyramid is a, a fairly big, sophisticated platform. It's not a tool that you install on your desktop. It's quite broad. You typically are going to implement it with a bunch of pretty sophisticated people if you're a big company to get it up and running. It's not difficult to do, but real data, real corporate structures, enterprise security, all these
Yeah.
exotic things need to come into play. Assuming you got beyond the get it into the company story, you basically need to come to the table with your corporate data estate. I don't use the word warehouse, I don't use the word lake, data lake, but come to the table with your data, point Pyramid at it, and you could be up and running in 5 minutes, and boom, your first question could be answered on the spot. In other words, that implementation and infrastructure stage in most companies is a bureaucracy that you need to deal with. But after that point, it becomes dead easy in getting things to work. And that's what, but that going back to your previous question, that's what the Gen BI story is about, making that adoption and deployment dead easy for the majority of people that have to go through a mission to get it to work. You have to become a world expert on semantic layers and drop zones and how do I do all this
Mm-hmm.
visual, how do I do that visual. Just ask questions and it'll work. But Pyramid is not something you just ordinarily install on your desktop, like maybe other products which are still focused like that. So most of our customers, that's what it looks like. It's an implementation, but the software is designed to be very easy to use once it's turned on. If you know what you're doing, by the way, you can install the product in 10 minutes flat. It's not that complicated. It's the bureaucracy that's always the red tape, as I call it, that
Right.
it makes things complicated. But I think
Right.
that's normal in any large company. It's not terribly unusual to go there.
Definitely.
Definitely. I encourage everybody to check out pyramidanalytics.com, get a demo, have a tour, see what it's capable of and how it can fit within your needs and your company. And follow Avi Perez on LinkedIn, of course.
Great. Thank you very much, George and Deanna. And if anyone wants to see a real talking demo, which I'm still feeling upset that I couldn't show it to you properly, but if you want to see one of those, check out, I think on my LinkedIn page or on the company's LinkedIn page, you see a couple of very short 2-minute videos that showed really working. By the way, they're all real. There's no black magic there. There is no fakery. It's the real deal. We're showing you how it really works, and you can see how that all comes together.
Yeah,
they're brilliant.
thank you.
I love those videos. Thank you very much, Avi, and thank you very much, everyone, for being here as always, for your presence, for your support, for the questions, and have a great rest of your week.
Great. Thank you very much. All the best, guys.
Bye, everyone.